Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Hardy. I'm the Director of Programs and Social Enterprise here at Executive Education at the Business School. I'm joined here by Professor Ray Horton. Ray is the founder of the Social Enterprise Program here at the school, as well as the Frank Lautenberg Professor of Ethics and Corporate Governance, and the Faculty Director of Programs and Social Enterprise here at the school. In our webinar today, we're going to be talking about a few different topics that we've been hearing from nonprofit leaders in terms of the challenges and opportunities they face in the sector. The broad themes for the webinar will be key challenges nonprofit leaders face today, some best practices around leadership and management, as well as the balancing act of scarce resources for nonprofit leaders. But first, we are going to talk about managing your mission. And before we get to that, I want to quickly remind folks that you can submit questions in the Q&A box, as well as this webinar will be recorded, so you'll be able to access this later. Now that we have the logistics out of the way, Ray, why don't you give us some of your thoughts as to what are some of the issues around managing mission, what nonprofit leaders face when dealing with that issue, and the challenges it may present?
Yeah. Well, from my perspective, the most important thing to manage in a nonprofit is its mission. And I don't mean in a broad sense, I mean initially in how you frame your mission. Because if you have your mission identified correctly, and we'll talk about what that means in a minute, then it makes the rest of your managerial life so much easier. If you have your mission clearly in your mind, then it helps you resolve trade-offs that otherwise would be very difficult. So what do I mean by a good mission, and what do I mean by managing your mission? Mm-hmm. A good mission statement should be one sentence long. It should be clear as a bell. One of the things that I constantly talk to with respect to sort of colleagues of mine who are in the nonprofit sector is, take a look at your mission. Is your mission statement clear? And so many times a mission statement is not a mission statement at all. It's a list of the 17 things that nonprofit organization is supposed to do. That's not a mission statement. That's just a potpourri of words that don't help you manage the organization whatsoever. You want a very clear mission statement so that when you face a trade-off and how you want to allocate your resources between this purpose and that purpose, all you have to do is go back to your mission statement. And it should say what the most important purpose is, and that ought to be sort of the iron law of managing your other issues that you come up.
Yeah, and it's so often that we hear from our alums and participants around the challenges around trade-offs and decisions that folks have to make, even for mission-critical issues. And they're constantly facing challenges that they know presents potentially mission creep.
Yeah.
And they're chasing either new programs, new services, responding to RFPs that are outside of maybe their core competency, but they view it as dollars they need or it's how they're gonna keep the lights on. So
that's a great point. And I suppose if I were to list the second thing that I talk to nonprofit leaders about after the clear mission thing, it is stick to your knitting. The search for money can be such a corrupting thing. It can pull you in directions that are not even remotely related to your mission. And you might figure, well, I'm going to do it because I got 10 or 15% of that money I can use for overhead.
Right, general operating. Right.
And then the next time you're a little short on resources, you see somebody else out there, a foundation or a private donor or a government agency that's sort of beckoning you, a siren call, come work with me. You get some money from them, and pretty soon you're not running the same organization. Right. You're running a hybrid organization that's unrelated to your mission. So mission creep is a really serious thing, particularly if it's people outside of your organization are driving it. The people who should drive the mission of the organization are you, the leadership, and the board of governors, trustees, or whatever you call them.
That's a great point. And I think we're changing gears a little bit, but since we're on this decision-making kind of line, we often talk about a framework for decision-making in terms of organizational performance and assessing organizational performance. And this is a framework you've come up with that we've coined VEQ.
Right.
But when we talk about leaders and the difficult decisions they have to make when they have very scarce resources, they know of the trade-offs inherent within the decision.
Yeah.
Whether they're going to go with option A or option B and what the consequences of both are going to be. Do you want to briefly talk about that framework and what that means for nonprofit leaders that want to assess their performance organizationally, not in terms of programs or
Well, it's very
staff.
complicated. There's no doubt about that. And the VEQ rule is much easier to use in an organization that has a clear mission statement than an organization that does not have a clear mission statement. But essentially, it basically says organizations like manufacturing firms produce things. They may not be widgets, they may not be tangible, they generally are social services of one kind or another, but there still is a volume of service, V, that they produce. And there is also a way in which they produce that service either efficiently or inefficiently. And finally, there's a Q, which is quality, and that is, are you providing enough service? Are you providing it as efficiently as you can? Is the quality as high as you can? Now, you can't resolve all of the trade-offs, but considering those three variables. But I guess if there's one thing that's bothered me historically with some people in the nonprofit sector, and it's really a bygone day issue in large measure, and that is, what we produce is so precious it can't be measured. That is, to me at least, something that's really wrong, and nonprofit managers and leaders and foundation officials that support nonprofit organizations really have to be very serious about focusing everybody's energy, ideally, in producing as much service as possible, as efficiently as possible, and as high quality as possible. And there are some trade-offs, no doubt about it, but there are many times when there are enough slack resources in the organization that you can move to maximizing each three.
Right. And that framework is I think, very useful because it simplifies, I think, into three major buckets or components where nonprofit leaders and their staff really should be focusing their energy on how they're analyzing organizational performance.
Exactly.
And in some cases, I think you and I both would agree that sometimes leaders they don't focus across those three buckets equally. They sometimes focus way too much on how much program we're providing. And they know the quality piece is important, but they don't think about the efficiency piece. They're not thinking about how to maximize technology or the way in which they're allocating their staff and their labor.
We're providing a half-assed service to a lot of people. And we shouldn't be providing a half-assed service to a lot of people. We should be providing really good services in keeping with the mission of the organization. Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
So one of the things that I hear a lot from the nonprofit leaders that I talk to, and many of them are my former students, so I know them pretty well. They worry about hiring, training, and retaining talent. It's like they have a hard time finding the people they think they need. They have a very difficult time keeping those people because they're good and they're in demand from other organizations. So I know you spend a lot of, in fact, you're involved in the nonprofit sector in a very direct way. What are your thoughts about this issue of sort of keeping quality talent?
Well, I think talent is one of the key, if I had to list the top five, this is the top three, is your talent. And that it's a key challenge that nonprofit leaders face. And I often think that it's not an area in which the executive director, the president and CEO does a careful enough audit of who their bench strength is, and then how are they cultivating those people to be potential successors, to expand their leadership capacity, and to expand their experience in a kind of in a growth trajectory where they're expanding their scope of responsibilities, they're more autonomous, and they're given consistent and quality feedback around their performance. And unfortunately, I think high performers are often, they're not given that amount of care because they're not problematic. they're high performers, and that the
Mhm.
leaders view them, almost take them for granted. They take their performance for granted, and they don't have a good sense of, well, what if this person left, or what about this role is making them unhappy? And they don't have a clear sense. They're not having those types of candid conversations with folks that are high performers. So in terms of a talent perspective, I think that care and that thoughtfulness for how are you managing your top talent? Do you have a clear understanding of their needs, their expectations, what they enjoy about their job, where could they grow? And they're not thoughtfully, putting a plan in place to allow them the room to grow. And I think in terms of retaining top talent, that's a key issue. Recruitment also is an area in which we hear a lot of challenges for folks and saying, well, where are the top talent? How do I find them? I'm trying to fill these director level roles. And in many ways, unfortunately, I think that they're looking for folks to solve a silver bullet. They want them to have management competency and capability. They want them to have specific experience that's directly related to the programs and services they provide or the communities that they serve. They don't think broadly enough around how experience can apply to their organization. And I think they limit how they think about the right candidates. And it's not broad enough, or they're not thinking of the role in a more flexible way that would allow them to maybe reach into new pools of talent or into different areas. And so I think they sell themselves short in that way.
It's hard though, because almost all nonprofit organizations have some sort of ethos about equity of compensation. And so in many respects, the way to attract and retain key talent, if you're having trouble, one answer is to raise the salary level. And of course that runs into this sort of equity idea that's prominent in a lot of nonprofit organizations, where you're going to give this person a big salary increase that's going to be substantially greater than the salary increase you give your rest of your senior staff.
Right.
Tough.
It's definitely tough. And it's a major, so Ray and I both sit on boards of New York City based nonprofits, and we're exposed to this from the insides of nonprofits and how they are grappling with these types of issues, especially when, for example, if you're a development person or you're business development and you're bringing in big dollars to the organization, how do you make the argument for pay and compensation and rewards and incentives? It's complicated, I agree, and it's also public if it's in your 990s. So
well, this is where it gets back. This is a kind of brutal, but it gets back to the point I made earlier about the clarity of your mission statement. If your mission is to provide high quality service to some particular set of people, it's not to promote equity in compensation at the staff level. That's that's an important thing, but it's it's not the primary mission. So that's a way in which, difficult as it is, clear mission helps you resolve some questions that are otherwise. That doesn't solve the problem of the staff that's disgruntled by the fact that one of their colleagues got a bigger increase than they did. But
and we've had this conversation with other past participants as well, and that the pushback is that you're also perpetuating the inequity that's reflected in larger society by disproportionately rewarding others based upon their functions. So that's a fair critique.
Absolutely.
But it's a counterpoint we should note.
Management is not easy in the nonprofit sector.
So we've covered kind of managing scarce resources. We have about 5 more minutes until we want to get into Q&A. So happy to see some folks here are posting questions in the chat box. We'll get to them in a few minutes. But one last piece that we wanted to specifically talk on is, and talk about is, at the school and in our programs, when we think about nonprofit leadership and what we're trying to provide nonprofit leaders access to is a framework and idea on how they think about their own leadership and how they can strengthen it, how they can define it, how they can employ it to the betterment of their programs and their services or organizations, their clients and their constituencies. We think about them in kind of 3 buckets. Kind of at the individual level, the team-based level, at the organizational level. Did you want to throw something?
No, you know more about this than I do. You talk about that.
That's not necessarily true. But when work with our participants, and we talk with them about their leadership, which is one of the key outputs of our programming. It has to start with the individual. And before, when we started this webinar, we're talking about clarity of mission.
Yeah.
And in many ways, you could say the same thing about leadership. It's clarity of who you are as a leader.
Yes.
What are your values? What is your vision for this organization? And then how are you going to drive the team and the organization to ultimately serve that mission and achieve the outcomes that you're designed and intending to deliver on? And there has to be a starting point for a leadership development exercise, and we start with the individual. Who are you? Where are you now? And where do you ultimately want to go?
Talk a little bit about how you spell that, how that spins out at the individual level. How do we try to teach that?
It first has to start with your own self-assessment. You need clarity around, what are my values? You can go through a number of exercises and activities in our programs to help surface maybe what they are, but they're already there. You know, what are your values? You need them salient, you need them clear and tied to organizational performance and the values of the organization that's trying to improve communities and large swaths of our society. But it has to start at the individual level, self-awareness. There has to be clarity, and you can do that through a variety of tools. One's our 360 survey, which is a leadership feedback tool, and others. The second is leader of a team, which clearly, if you're in our programs, you're managing staff, you're managing resources and a budget, but how are you that interpersonal leader amongst leading teams to greater performance, likely with an eye towards diversity? That's a key issue in our program and in the sector. Who's at the table, and how do you bring many different views and perspectives and backgrounds together to ultimately have a greater impact and greater outcome? How do you build out that level of competency as a leader of teams and hopefully diverse teams? And then larger at the organizational level. You know, you are the face of the institution. You are the person that's out in the field.
You're representing the institution to all sorts of quote stakeholders.
Right, exactly. So you have to think about that in these kind of three rings, but it does start with the individual and then of teams and then of the organization. I think that's a framework that folks attending this webinar would be helpful to hear about. Do you have clarity at each of those rings? Do you think about it in those terms? And how they are, they're not isolated, they're related and they influence each other. But in many ways it starts at the individual level.
And I think one of the points I would make in that connection is it's not an art.
Right.
It's something that you can learn, and there are specific sort of tools that you can, that are existent right now that can help you learn how to relate as an individual. As a team leader, as an organizational leader or a spokesperson. Yeah, it's very good.
You know, leaders aren't born, right? That's this innate skill and capacity.
That's exactly
it can be learned, right? Exactly. So I want to look to some of the questions that are coming in here and quickly scan through these to see what we can speak to. So a couple here have one that we haven't touched on as much, but could be helpful to address is around nonprofit leaders working with their boards, and what is some, even from our perspective as current board members and serving on boards in New York City, what are some best practices or areas in which, when we think about governance, the role of the board, and the relationship between, interdependent relationship between executive director, senior staff, and boards.
So here's where some of my own personal experiences come in, as opposed to what I've sort of learned from reading and talking to people. I ran a pretty high-powered nonprofit organization for, I guess, 15 years almost. And so I have a very strong feeling about the right way to the right and the wrong way to deal with your board. You know, I think it is like completely transparent. The minute you try to hide something, you're in trouble. You want to have a day-to-day relationship, not a once-a-week relationship. A day should not go by when you do not pick up the phone and give a call to your chairperson and say, you know, what are you doing today? Here's what I'm doing today. in a sense, shooting the breeze, but also sort of giving each of you an opportunity to communicate about something that's important. And finally, preparation for board meetings. Board meetings are like high holy days. You should have an incredible, I work with a person right now who's actually, she's a tremendous CEO of a nonprofit organization. Her preparation for a board meeting is just unbelievable. So you have no excuse as a board member of this organization for not being up to speed on everything that's going on in the organization. So preparation for board meetings, frequent day-to-day conversations with the chair of your board, and don't try to hide anything because you're going to get in trouble if you pull the wool over their eyes. Unless you have a completely sleepy board, in which case you're damned to hell. The word go.
Right, with a ineffective or useless board, I would agree.
Exactly.
The only thing I would kind of add to this around boards is what type of board you have, and are you satisfied with the board that you do have? If it's purely an advisory board versus a true governance board, dependent upon your structure and your needs. But I think that, again, that goes back to your mission of your organization, and then how is your board helping you serve your mission? And that clarity and that line of sight should also be there. The board needs to have a very clear understanding of what their role is in supporting that mission. And that can be a disconnect. And oftentimes board members think that serving the mission is getting in the weeds around programming.
Oh, no, absolutely. Totally.
And
yes, and in fact, that's one reason why you need to talk to your chairman, because your chairman can fend that off. If you have a particular board member who's driving you crazy because she or he is overstepping the line, the best way to deal with that is to have a conversation with the chairman. And if you can't manage it, the chairman's job is to manage it.
There's often a bandwidth issue, I think, in some cases, when I hear pushback in terms of our perspective on what the ED board, chair relationship should be. It's like, well, I don't have time in my day for daily meetings or calls with my board chair. That's the way that you're framing it. This is a key, essential relationship that has to be managed and nurtured over time,
informed,
So the only thing that I would add is, is your board structured to meet the mission that you're trying to accomplish, whether it be advisory board, a true governing board, their funding and giving rates, what is their role as strategic advisors, and then that buffer zone so that they're not in the weeds around programming or staff or, they're doing your copy editing for your marketing campaigns. That they should be much more at the elevated strategic level. So those are some issues I think that we hear often about and think about in terms of the governance function and role as it relates to nonprofit leaders. This is an interesting question around managing volunteers. Okay, this is often a group, especially if you're a smaller community-based organization, you might have only a handful of full-time staff, but you have an army of volunteers that are out there helping you provide service directly in the community. And I think about a few that have come through our program. Now that's their model. They're really reliant upon those volunteers to execute service and to be kind of key allies in just the kind of the life of the organization. Do you have any thoughts that you'd want to share about?
It's something I haven't had much experience with. Sort of intuitively, my sense is, if you have a good volunteer, treat her or him like a goddess or a god. I mean, a volunteer who can do something, or 5 volunteers who can do something that would cost you $100,000 to pay a staff person for, that's like having $100,000 in your hand that you otherwise wouldn't have, that you could use for other purposes. But I must say I haven't had that much experience in an organization that relied on volunteers.
The one area in which I've heard some good practice around this, and this might not be new to the person that submitted the question, but thank you for it, is that how are you structuring and managing your volunteer base? It's not just because they're volunteers, there's this free labor that you can kind of make use of. You have to treat them as a key stakeholder that's directly aligned to mission. So who are your top volunteers, and how are they being treated and communicated with and brought into larger communications within the organization as if they were a paid staffer? And then how is messaging and communication being funneled through them to the other volunteers? So in other ways, you're kind of managing a team with these
Yes.
leads that are being more closely aligned
Yes.
to key conversations and strategy conversations. They shouldn't just be kind of left outside and then called to do service when you have your event coming up. How are they on an ongoing basis being integrated into the conversation of the organization? And that's where I've seen them being used really effectively. And that they have a few key leads, that all communication to other volunteers goes through them, and they're managed as if they were part of the organization. They just happen to sit outside of it. Formally in terms of the org chart.
And you have to figure out non-monetary ways to
reward them. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's potentially honoring them or recognizing their efforts. It's being in a variety of different ways that are.
Or sitting down and talking with them as you walk through the shop.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's very important.
I think that reward point is a great one around
psychological rewards.
That's right. One issue that's, some of these are a little bit specific, that would be hard to kind of extrapolate for the larger audience, but one key issue that when we have a few minutes remaining, a lot of nonprofits use consultants. They use them on an ad hoc basis for either assessing, programming, doing it, you could even have a consultant being your development person that you have on a contract. They're not formally within the organization, and they're kind of on an ad hoc basis, and you use them intermittently. Do you have any thoughts on best practices in using consultants or approaches to using consulting services, largely defined for nonprofits? Because it is something I think a lot of nonprofits use as a way to either cost savings or it's project specific, and then they don't need it as a full-time staff.
I don't know that I have a lot to say about this, except I've used consultants when I was running a nonprofit organization. It's hard to keep an eye on them, particularly if they don't want to work under the same roof. And so managing a consultant, I think, is a very challenging thing unless that person is in your shop and you're in their face and that person's in your face on a fairly regular basis. All things being equal, I hate to say this to those consultants out there, all things being equal, I'd rather have a good staff person than a consultant.
My thinking is in line with this, in that, are you outsourcing skills and abilities to a consultant that, because of a short-term need or short-term financial constraints, that otherwise you should be investing in internally in the long run? Are you better served by having those skills and capabilities and experiences within the organization versus outsourcing it? And I think that's the tension for a lot of folks, why they use consultants so much, is that they have a very immediate need that they need to fill now, and they don't have the internal competency to do the job. So they have to hire a consultant. But are they thinking about the work in a different way? Is it just a project that needs to get done, or is it skills, capacity, and abilities that you'd be better served by having in-house and going through the growing pains in the near term, and then in the longer term having that staffer have that skill and ability? So there is that tension, I think, often where we hear folks in terms of with short-term, long-term, project-based, but nonprofit leaders need to be thinking about, why am I hiring or outsourcing this work that needs to be done by this organization? And I don't think they're often thinking about it in those critical terms.
One of the interesting things that I'm becoming more and more aware of is how many consultants are really personal coaches to the leadership of the organization. And that's a really interesting way of consulting. And I might take some of my criticism of consultants generally away. I think coaching, if you're really good at it and you're dealing one-on-one with the director or leadership of orgs, it can be very valuable.
I completely agree. And the last minute here that I'll add to this is that we use this phrase, it's lonely at the top. And that for senior leaders that come through our courses, they don't have a space where they can, in confidence, vent their frustrations or acknowledge their own deficits in a way that they feel like it will be taken as a safe and secure way to discuss it. So
Yeah.
I would concur that coaching is critical, especially at the most senior levels, and that's something to invest in. That brings us to 1 o'clock. I hope all the folks that attended our webinar today, first, thank you for joining us. I hope that you found this conversation somewhat meandering through a lot of different topics, but I think we covered a lot of ground. I hope you found it useful. This will be recorded and sent to you via email. Thanks for joining. Take care.